and ponder a philosophical question. The question is this: if science is being steered by theology, is it still scientific? And I ask this because the idea of humans having dominion over nature is a theological construct. It's a theological construct because it's based upon an unprovable belief system, as opposed to the scientific fact, which is that humans are of nature, and that nature has dominion over humans. Now, nature's agenda is always long-term sustainability. Humans' agenda is usually short-term gain. And that almost always leads to unintended consequences, which tend to be adverse and long-term. Now, if science is being performed from a vantage that humans have dominion over nature, aka a theological construct, and the aim of that science is to manipulate nature to serve a human, i.e. short-term agenda, rather than to understand and work with nature to serve nature's, i.e. long-term sustainable agenda, is that science actually scientific? And my impulse is to say, no, that science is simply a front for theology. Okay, pondering done. Philosophy is not for everyone. So, during the course of this video, we've articulated many provable scientific reasons why vaccinations may not be such a good idea. But in truth, I'm under no illusion that any strong vaccination advocate, after watching this video and being presented with this information, is going to change their mind. And why would that be? Why would a person support vaccinations even after receiving good information that they may be harmful? And that is simple. They would continue to advocate vaccination because they, doctors, the government, scientists, newspapers, magazines, bloggers, talk show hosts, etc., say so. I'm not sure who to blame for this. Is it the fault of our education system? It discourages people to think from themselves, doesn't teach anything resembling critical thinking? Or is it just human nature to want to defer to authority? But the question remains, why do we readily assume that someone else knows better than we do about what we need to do for ourselves? Why do we so easily accept the claims that someone or something has our best interests at heart, even when there's copious evidence to suggest that they don't? And these aren't actually rhetorical questions here. These are actual questions because there is a reason. The reason is the power of myth. Myth. Surely we sophisticated Westerners are not susceptible to such an archaic notion as myth. Myth, from Merriam-Webster, a popular belief that has grown up around something that embodies the ideals and institutions of a society or a segment of society. Why do we hold myths? There's a lot of possible answers. One that I think is germane to what we're discussing is that myths provide a sense of safety, of organization, and of meaning. For example, if we believe that if an earthquake or hurricane strikes, no one's going to have our backs, we'd be more stressed out going about our daily lives. So instead, we believe that the government will take care of us despite evidence to the contrary. Oftentimes, if a person experiences the very abrupt death of a myth, for example, a gung-ho soldier goes off to war and then is exposed to the reality, it contradicts the reasons why they thought they were fighting, afterwards they endure profound depression. And so that explains why we hold on to myths so tightly, because no matter how much evidence we encounter to the contrary, it can feel real bad to lose a myth. It can literally feel like a death. I say can because it can also feel very liberating, but it depends on the person and the myth. And there's one more factor I should mention. It's the seductive power of victimhood. Put it simply, most of us are terrified to assume responsibility over aspects of our lives. We feel much more comfortable abdicating our responsibility to others. And if things go wrong, as they often do, we can easily slide into the role of the victim and say, oh, it wasn't my fault. What can you do? There's nothing I could have done. It's just God's will, For whatever reason, it feels very natural to do that for maybe most of us. It doesn't make much sense, but neither do a lot of our behaviors. So here's what it looks like. On one hand, we have the rational mind, and then on the other side, we have ingrained behaviors, the power of myth. For a lot of us, the rational mind doesn't stand a chance. So let's look at some of these reasons and some of these mythologies. I vaccinate because doctors say to. What are some of the mythologies associated with this statement? Maybe something like, doctors know best about all matters of health. Doctors are the most intelligent members of society. Doctors are valiant warriors whose greatest desire is to protect our health. So let's ask the questions. Are these mythologies true? Let's start. Do doctors know best about all matters of health? I don't know. Let's look at this question from another angle. How do doctors learn what they know? Well, first they go to medical school. Do they learn to finally hone their critical thinking facility in medical school? No. Mostly they memorize a lot of shit. Have all pediatricians, for example, closely examined the pros and cons of vaccinations in medical school like we just did? No. Typically, because I can't speak for all medical schools, students are given no education regarding dissenting viewpoints on vaccinations. That's good old scientific consensus at work. What about after medical school? Does everyone know about standard of care? This is a treatment guide that most, if not all, doctors use. How are standards of care established? Well, by our old friend consensus. Who establishes standards of care? Different groups for different things. In the case of vaccinations, it's a group called the National Vaccine Advisory Committee. Now, does everyone know what a closed loop is? Like, if you're a doctor and you begin to harbor doubts about the wisdom of vaccinating, would you expect encouragement to explore those doubts in a scientific manner by the National Vaccine Advisory Committee, which includes, among its 35 members, many representatives from the pharmaceutical industry? So what would happen if a doctor, after observing things, stopped abiding by the standard of care established by the NVAC? Well, they'd be no longer protected against malpractice. So if one of their patients contracted a disease that they could have vaccinated for, the doctor would be liable. However, if the doctor followed the standard of care, and one of their patients had a reaction to a vaccination, the doctor would be protected. That's not exactly a motivation to deviate from standard of care, is it? Now, in truth, there are some brave doctors who do follow their conscience and do deviate from the standard of care. In some cases, they are ostracized by their peers and even persecuted, such as our friend Dr. Jane Donegan, The General Medical Council, which I guess is England's version of the AMA, accused her of serious medical misconduct after she testified against vaccinations in a court case. Now, she was completely exonerated, but others haven't been so fortunate. My point is, it appears as though doctors are subject to forces that are more concerned about maintaining the status quo than searching for the truth. Now, here's an example of a quote from a pediatrician's wife. You can read it here. It's apocryphal. It's anonymous, so I don't know if it's true or not. I would question the integrity of a doctor knowing these things and maintaining silence, but whatever. In any case, no matter what a medical doctor does or doesn't do, the truth remains they're still practicing Western medicine. It's like any practitioner of any system. No matter how good you are at what you do, you're still bound by the parameters of that system. Now, people have differing and varying opinions about Western medicine, and it's very predictable. Whenever someone criticizes Western medicine, someone else will say, okay, so the next time you get in a car wreck and break some bones, we'll ship you right over to your acupuncturist, or whatever they're going to say. So let's be very clear from the get-go. There are many disciplines grouped under the umbrella of Western medicine. And some of these are peerless. Trauma care, orthopedics, these are all essentially bioengineering, and they're amazing. But there's other disciplines that Western medicine handles very poorly, in my opinion. Childbirth is the first that comes to mind. Now, why does Western medicine do childbirth so poorly? Because it reduces an incredibly complex event, which involves factors that we're just now starting to understand, that have ramifications for the child's entire life, and reduces them into a simple engineering problem, and then stuffs it into a box that consists of the only two tools that Western medicine really has: surgery and drugs. Now, the more we learn about immunity, the more complex it becomes. It's really just a continuation, like an unfolding of the childbirth process. And still, Western medicine only knows to do what it does: surgery and drugs. And I'm going to consider vaccinations to be a hybrid of the two. So, considering the very distinct limitations of Western medicine, would you really say that doctors know best about all matters of health? What did I hear? That doctors in medical school typically receive 10 hours of training about nutrition? Which is insane, because I've heard that there's a connection between nutrition and health. I'm not sure. Anyway, obviously doctors don't know best about all matters of health. You look around us. Our society is incredibly unhealthy. We're one of the wealthiest societies the world has ever known. How is that even possible? Now, are doctors smarter than us? I suppose they're real good at memorizing things. You have to be very disciplined to get through medical school, that's true. But smarter? How do you define that? If I pledge unflinching fealty to a system with incredibly obvious limitations, does that make me super intelligent? And really, ask the question, is your doctor healthier than you? Are doctors valiant health warriors only concerned with saving us all from disease? Here's a quote from George Bernard Shaw, the great playwright, in 1909. "Doctors are just like other Englishmen. Most of them have no honor and no conscience." That's a very harsh assessment, but seriously, do we really believe that doctors exist on a higher moral plane than the rest of us? I don't think it's a stretch to say that doctors are just like the rest of us. They want to make money, they want to live comfortably, they want to avoid trouble, they want a good reputation. So what exactly would their motivation be for messing with the status quo? You know, and it's fine. They're not bad. But can we at least puncture the myth that doctors are authorities in all matters of health and ought not to be questioned or contravened? They practice Western medicine, which, while exemplary in some areas, is deeply flawed and profoundly ignorant in others. I've heard it said that Western medicine is always 20 years behind science. Think about that. And any doctor who bucks the status quo has very little to gain and very much to lose. It is absolutely 100% A-OK to question what a doctor says. And it's dangerous to criticize doctors. They have a lot of political power, you know, and I'm sure many of them very much enjoy the fact that people do what they say without questioning. Hey, did you know what the third leading cause of death in the United States is after heart attack or heart disease and cancer? It's preventable medical error. It's currently estimated to claim 440,000 lives annually, and it grows by the year. 440,000 deaths annually. That's 1,200 deaths a day? Each day? Terrorists, killer virus, measles, yet 1,200 deaths a day? We don't really hear any hoo-ha. Okay, enough with doctors. I vaccinate because the government says to. Surely the government's primary concern is for the health and welfare of its citizens. So, first of all, do we really need to have this conversation? You know, as we mentioned about myths, they provide a sense of safety. And for many people, no matter how many hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of examples they may be witness to the contrary, it would be profoundly disorienting to them to lose the idea that the government has their best interests at heart. And for someone who is really invested in that idea, it usually takes a very personal experience to lose that myth. But anyway, let's take a quick look at the two governmental instruments that have the most to do with vaccinations, the FDA and the CDC. Does the FDA have our best interests at heart? Well, we know the idea of the FDA has our best interests at heart, but in reality, not so much. In reality, the FDA receives a tremendous amount of influence and pressure from the pharmaceutical industry. While there's no doubt that many of the scientists working for the FDA do take their mission seriously, there are many documented instances of pressure from FDA management, steered no doubt by the politicians who oversee them, to bury research, to falsify data, to fast-track medications that later prove to be harmful, such as Vioxx, and to steer the overall tenor of the approval process in such a way that values approval of drugs over public safety. And this whole process is greased, of course, by oodles and oodles of cash. Over $200 million last year alone that the pharmaceutical industry spends on lobbying our governmental representatives. So the question needs to be asked, what is that industry receiving for $200 million each and every year? Over $3 billion since 1998. 50% more money than what the next industry spends on lobbying. we can only guess what they're receiving. So while the FDA does have our best interests at heart, it also has the pharmaceutical industry's best interests at heart, which in the context of vaccines is problematic. I'm thinking of what the Bible says about serving two masters. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control. Does the CDC have our best interests at heart? We all kind of assume so, right? Their pledge states explicitly to base all public health decisions on the highest quality scientific data that is derived openly and objectively. So let's take a brief look at this. Again, there's no doubt that the CDC is staffed by many dedicated doctors and scientists who truly believe that they are fulfilling that pledge. But there are problems. Let's start by looking at that pledge again. What's wrong with that? Data may be derived objectively, but is it ever interpreted objectively? Is that even possible? And should decisions be based upon data, which can be faulty, manipulated, or just downright incomplete, rather than intelligence and critical thought? As they say, garbage in, garbage out. As in, there is no data regarding the long-term health effects of vaccinations, nor autism incidence in vaccinated populations versus unvaccinated populations, yada yada yada. How can you base a decision upon data that does not exist? There's a myth that many scientists believe about themselves, and they actively propagate this myth as well. The myth is that scientists possess a singular objectivity based upon data and logic, as opposed to emotion and fuzzy thinking that makes them uniquely qualified to determine what is true. Why is that a myth? Why is that not true? Well, because, as we've touched upon earlier, that entire premise is based upon materialism, which is a theological construct, and which is not supported by actual observation or experience. It's even directly contradicted by quantum science. So it's like when you hang a picture, the way you frame it is sometimes more important than what it is you frame. And so we have the scientists and the doctors of the CDC, and all of them, I'm sure, are well-meaning, but they're also all steeped in the Western medical paradigm. All of them are steeped in a pre-existing culture of vaccination. So where exactly within the CDC would a dissenting viewpoint on vaccinations take root? It's not a reasonable thing to expect. So why would we interpret a lack of that dissent from the CDC as proof of anything? Is the CDC subject to influence from the pharmaceutical industry? There's plenty of evidence to that effect. I guess the first to mention would be Julie Geberding here, who was one of the directors of the CDC throughout the 2000s. After resigning in 2009, she became president of Merck's vaccine division. That's interesting. Now, who ultimately steers the CDC? Our elected officials do. Are these officials subject to influence by the pharmaceutical industry, judging by $200 million per year in lobbying expenditures? Yes, they are. So, given this situation, what would the circumstance be by which the CDC might take a stand against vaccinations? Can you think of any? Hey, this is the latest from the CDC. They're creating a new website that publicly tracks the vaccination rates of all schools nationwide. Meanwhile, it takes hours and hours of digging to find reliable statistics on increasing incidences of childhood disease And there are no statistics showing, for example, whether vaccinated kids are healthier overall than unvaccinated kids. So that is a good indication of the CDC's current priorities. Do our elected officials have our best interests at heart? Some of them do, some of them don't. Do the millions and millions of corporate dollars spent on lobbying and campaign finance make that a somewhat ridiculous question to ask? Yes. Yes, they do. Bloggers. Do they have our best interests at heart? You know, anyone who's done any online research into vaccination has run into these guys. I think they're all guys anyway. They have these gnarly sounding names like Skeptic and Skeptical Raptor, Kinja and Devon Stormageddon. There's a bunch of them. Now these people, they're all on Team Vax, and they all use similar polemical tactics. You know, they define the entire complex vaccination debate into Team Vax and Team Anti-Vax, and then they denigrate Team Anti-Vax with misrepresentation, insults, profanities, and especially condescension. They're big fans of straw man arguments. They love to quote myth as fact, and they love to dumb down the entire debate. They're usually belligerent, and they're kind of scary, kind of like a smart bully. And if you are someone doing research online that is not that sure of the reasons that you're questioning vaccinations, or you're not that sure of your own intelligence, it's very easy to be intimidated by these people and to swallow your own concerns. So the thing you need to remember about these people, besides the fact that most of them are assholes, I'm sorry, I said no name calling here. Most of them have never actually researched the pros and cons of the vaccination issue. They have confused science with pseudoscience. So they identify with good old scientific consensus, and then they use their big left brains to justify that choice. They're like junior stormtroopers or something. And a word about condescension, you know, a lot of bloggers, we all do it. We all use a tone of, I can't believe I have to state this. It's so fucking obvious. You people are so stupid that I have to say this. So what is that? Does that mean you are that stupid? No. It's a rhetorical tool. It leads an insecure person to question their own beliefs without providing an actual reason to do so. And typically those who use the most condescension have the least amount of actual rationale, which is why they have to gussy it up with so much disdain. Anyway, don't be scared of these. They're like true believers. You know, you can actually have fun reading these, picking apart their arguments, which are usually pretty easy to pick apart. And you can learn to recognize their cheap rhetorical devices, and it will make you smarter. And they do make good points too, you know. It's like the anti-vaxxers aren't blameless either. There's a lot of real sloppy thinking being used to rationalize not vaccinating. You know, like, oh, Amish people don't vaccinate, and autism is virtually unknown by them. You know, and then they use that as an argument without actually finding out if it's really true. So, you know, misinformation is misinformation no matter who is spouting it, and it damages the entire debate. Now, the media. Let's talk about the media. And that includes talk show hosts, magazines, newspapers, online media. Does the media have our best interests at heart? Surely journalistic integrity demands that our established news sources report what they best determine to be the unvarnished truth. So, when we talk about media, we need to talk about corporations. Almost all media outlets are owned by large corporations. Some are still privately owned, but even those tend to be owned by extremely rich, wealthy people. So what is the goal of every corporation? That's right, to make a profit. That's pretty non-controversial, right? Right? So, can someone, anyone, please explain to me the link between making a profit and providing unbiased, unvarnished truth to the nation? That's right. There's no link. None whatsoever. The only rational course of action for a media corporation to take is to report that which will increase its profits. Right? And if you think about that, that's a very non-controversial statement to make. And if it just feels wrong to you, that is the feeling of a myth grinding up against reality. So just breathe through it. But here's the interesting thing. Who owns the media? Have you ever looked into that? Who owns the publicly traded corporations? The media corporations. Let's look at some slides. These slides show the majority owners of some of the largest media corporations. Time Warner, Tribune Company, News Corporation, Gannett Company, Media News Group, McClatchy. We all know Fox is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Let's look at these. Let's see what we can see. Do you see any names repeating in these majority owners, majority stockholders? So as you can see, the majority owners of these companies are large banks and large investment management companies, such as Vanguard Group, State Street, BlackRock, Fidelity, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Barclays, etc. And looking further, you can see that the majority owners of the large banks include those same investment management companies. Vanguard, State Street, BlackRock, Fidelity, and smaller ones as well. Now, let's look at who owns the pharmaceutical companies. Here are the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. By golly, it appears to be the same cast of characters who own the media companies. Look at that. Vanguard Group, State Street, BlackRock, Fidelity, Barclays. Do you understand? The media, the pharmaceutical companies, the arms manufacturers, Monsanto, Taco Bell, etc., are all owned by the same people. And because of the profound influence of corporate dollars in our government, it's not a stretch to say that our government is also owned by these same people. Does this shock you? Does this surprise you? If it does, once again, that's the feeling of myth grinding up against reality. Is this all just unfounded paranoia? It's not paranoia if you can find it out by spending 15 minutes on Google Finance or Yahoo Finance. You know, none of this is a secret. So why isn't this news? Why isn't this situation, this congruence, this confluence, why isn't it being blared from the headlines, being woven into every story, being trumpeted on network news? Think about that question. So let's depart the world of facts for a moment and enter the realm of conjecture and ask the question, why? Why might our pharmaceutical and medical industries and their sibling media industry be conspiring to make us less healthy rather than more healthy? And the answer is very simple. Because you are more profitable to them sick than well. And again, how that statement makes you feel depends on what myths you are currently embracing. You know, we all recognize that we live in a capitalist society. What's capitalism? You know, ultimately, if you boil it down, it's about taking care of yourself. Individuals take care of themselves. Corporations take care of themselves too. Is there anywhere in the capitalist credo that mentions caretaking the common good? No. So why are we so surprised when profit takes precedence over the common good? Isn't that the full flowering of capitalism? Aren't we all in favor of capitalism? So why are we shocked? I'm going to break it down for you, and I'm going to be very blunt. Nobody has your best interests at heart. Nobody. You may find individuals who do, but virtually every institution and everyone who is a part of those institutions has a vested interest in pursuing their own agendas, which may or may not be aligned with your best interests. And if that's hard for you to hear or not, whether that leaves you feeling disconsolate or not, that's the reality. Only you have your best interests at heart, so it's up to you to figure out how to help yourself. We arrive back at our original question. Should you or should you not vaccinate? Now, in order to help you make a clear decision, here's what's left of our list. These are the reasons that are true. You can base your decision upon these reasons. So should you? Should you not? The answer is whatever you want. You know, the reality is that both options have pros and cons. Both options have risks and rewards. You need to educate yourself on what those are and then make your decision accordingly so that you assume responsibility for your own family's health. And that will empower you. So, you know, once you make your decision, is that it? No. No matter what we decide, we have to set to work on minimizing our risks, whatever they are. If we choose not to vaccinate, then it only makes sense that we make strengthening our child's immunity a priority. We can do this any number of ways. Breastfeeding, feeding them whole, unprocessed foods with lots of fruits and vegetables, maintaining their gut flora, very important, maximizing their sleep, minimizing their stress, etc., etc. Educate yourself. There's a lot of information about this stuff out there. You know, become an expert or consult an expert. There are experts out there. If we choose to vaccinate, then we need to begin and maintain a cleansing regimen for our child so that little by little we can remove the toxins from their bodies before lasting damage is done. We need to strengthen their eliminative functions, their liver, their kidneys, their colon. And you can do this in many of the same ways. You strengthen the immune system, good diet, good lifestyle, good elimination. You know, become an expert. Consult an expert. Because the truth is, whether we vaccinate or not, unless we prioritize healthy eating and a healthy lifestyle, we're going to very likely end up sick. Sooner rather than later. You know, look around you. Look around when you're driving. There's no end of examples of people who have made poor eating or lifestyle choices. Gaining knowledge through observation, that is science. Now I have a question for you. Am I anti-vaccination? So my wife Nicole and I want to eventually take our kids to live in India for a while. We love India. We've lived there before, and you know, hopefully within the next 5 years we can do it. And we have 2 small children. So right now our plan is, before we go, to have our children vaccinated for diphtheria and possibly tetanus. Why? Because while diphtheria is as good as non-existent in the US, there were 2,500 recorded cases in India last year, and diphtheria is not something you want to mess around with. Same with tetanus. You know, given what we know about the prevalence of antibiotic-resistant bacteria in India, any steps that we can take to keep our children out of a hospital there seems wise. So, do you see what we just did? We use knowledge and information to weigh the risks and make an informed decision about vaccinating. We're not anti anything. We're pro-choice and we're pro-knowledge. So I want to encourage everyone to become a scientist in every aspect of your lives. Observe and experiment. You don't need a white coat. You need to observe and experiment. And I want to encourage you to take back responsibility for your own health and for your family's health, because, you know, being a victim is no way to live. It's no way to go through life. Take responsibility. It's your right. So that's the end. Thank you for sitting through all of this. If you like this video, please pass it on to your friends and your family. If there's anything you think I got wrong, please let me know about it nicely. Provide documentation and proof, and I'll add it. And hopefully this will add something constructive to the vaccination debate. Thank you. Good night.